movie's working. How important are your movies?
I mean, you know, they're nice, but they're not. I can like act them out for you guys if I have to.
He'll be presenting a subset of what he spoke on at his defense at the end of December, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so we're all proud of him for getting to this point, and he will be talking about assessing perceptual cognitive skill in soccer online. There we go.
Is this different video clips that we watched last year?
Yeah. They'll be a little different, but similar. All right. Well, maybe I'll just do one of them when we get there. Okay. So and this does this, right? I can just. No, that's not. Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk to you about a subset of the data I presented on at my thesis defense in December, like Shane just said. And the part I'm going to focus on is the applied tool that I have developed. Okay, so this applied tool I call the Online Assessment of Strategic Skill in Soccer, or OASSIS. It's based off of research tasks for predicting skill in sport. In particular, it's based off of a paradigm in Ward, Erickson, and Williams publication where participants are presented with dynamic scenes of soccer play that occlude, and they're forced to generate what sorts of things might happen next. The thing is, with this test, is that people draw their responses with pencil onto a piece of paper. That goes through a series of coding. You have to compare those coded responses with the responses generated by an expert panel, and then you have to categorize those responses. And it's really time-consuming, and it's not very likely to be adopted by anyone outside of academia as a diagnostic tool. So I wanted to make something that was more usable, more accessible, but still diagnostically powerful, so that it could be used by coaches or players out there in the real world. And like I said, so the three experiments that I'll refer to are 4, 5, and 6 of my thesis. So when you see that, that's what that's referring to. All right, so my methods. Participants just watch clips of typical soccer play, which I'm going to maybe show you. Maybe you're going to have to guess what that means. The video occludes prior to a critical decision moment, just before the player maybe kicks the ball to pass to a teammate. And the occlusion image appears on screen, which takes all the players off of the screen. And all you can see is the ball and the field lines. Now let's see, just quickly, if any of these are going to work. This is probably the coolest looking one. Okay, that's interesting. That just popped into a different window like that. I normally run these with QuickTime, and VOC handles them a little bit differently. Okay, so when that window pops up, I want you to see if I can get this to stay up, actually, because that will be pretty cool. Okay, so the ball represents the player's location. Normally this is just left on screen, so you don't have to quickly grab it. And participant selects responses online by just selecting one of these highlighted answers, and it's through a survey site called Qualtrics, so they just respond with multiple choice, as opposed to the more complicated format of response in the option generation task. Other times, I'll let somebody try this one. Other times, instead of indicating a direction that's going to happen next, the occlusion image might appear. Oh, I missed it. And you might just guess what action the player was going to perform next. So, try this one more time. Okay, so basically the participant would respond to response options that are displayed beneath this image that say pass, shoot, dribble. Do you guys have any idea what that player was going to do?
Are you asking us what he should do?
Or I'm asking you what he will do. What he would have done had the screen not moved. Yeah.
He's going to dribble down to the
baseline. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's what he does. Got one more here. So this
Why
one.
did you say that?
It's just obvious.
Because he's an expert, obviously. So in this one here, you'll want to pick. Given that you know it's going to be a pass, you pick which person it's going to go to. And it's really tough to see with this thing popping up at the last second and blocking your view. But essentially the guy starts to wind up like he's going to play it down to the letter D, if you can make that out. It's the for this one down, I'm just going to hold the mouse on this screen while I move to this screen. Okay, so yeah, so he basically plays it sort of into the space there ahead of that runner. And so to answer a series of these questions where they're forced to anticipate the outcome of these situations. But despite the fact that it appears to be a valid test of perceptual cognitive skill in soccer, I wanted to focus on the types of validation that we've talked about in this program, or at least some of them. So I wanted to answer questions regarding the criterion validity, provide concurrent validity for the OASSIS, and provide convergent validity. The questions I asked for each of those were sort of empirically based questions. So, does OASSIS discriminate between skill groups? If so, I think that sort of suggests criterion validity for the stimuli that I use. Concurrent validity. Is OASSIS related to anticipation skill as measured by another test? Namely, that's going to be the option generation test that I talked about before. And also convergent validity. Is OASSIS related to a similar construct? Is anticipation as measured by OASSIS related to another construct that you would think would be related to anticipation? And that namely is going to be a test of declarative knowledge. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of go right into the data here. So in experiment 4, I observed a skill effect on OASSIS performance. So 13 Division I soccer players and coaches anticipated 32 trials correctly, whereas 37 recreational level players anticipated 26 trials correctly. So that was a significant effect, and a pretty large effect on Cohen's D there. And also, in experiment 5, 16 NCAA Division I players anticipated 28 of the trials correctly, whereas 17 recreational level players anticipated 24 of the trials correctly. So a smaller effect, but still a significant effect, basically suggesting that over the course of the 45 trials these players complete, better players do better. I also wanted to look at concurrent validity. So I wanted to see if performance on the OASSIS was related to anticipation accuracy on the option generation task. That was established in that paper by Ward and colleagues. And in this case, it was. So basically, in that option generation task, through that series of coding I described, you determine whether the option that the person drew on, if that was the right answer. Those two things were correlated. And again, in experiment 5, with a different set of participants, those things were again correlated. So I think that kind of provided concurrent validity for the OASSIS. I also wanted to look at convergent validity. So this one, in the option generation task, one of the skills that are highly predictive of what skill group a person belongs to is their ability to generate high quality and to generate fewer low quality options. So a good player might sit down and the screen freezes and they draw 3 different things that are all threatening as deemed by an expert panel, whereas someone who doesn't really know what's going on might come on and go, I don't know, he's going to shoot, even though he's 50 yards away. So these responses are grouped into high quality and low quality responses. And it turns out that the number of high quality responses someone generates and the number of low quality options someone generates were not significantly predictive of OASSIS performance. Now, I'm going to preface that with a power issue, which I'll show you here. So I've basically used a multiple regression analysis here and just entered in these numbers. Now, I want you to pay attention to the R-squared value, though, because that's my proof that it's just a power issue. Because in experiment 5, I actually observed a slightly smaller R-squared, but with my increase in participants, there's a significant effect. So the number of high quality or task relevant options, I've probably called it in the past, and low quality or task irrelevant options generated during this option generation task were significantly predictive of performance on the OASSIS online from participants that completed both tasks. And those relationships were observed among a skill group containing both recreational level and Division I level players. One other thing I wanted to do was Okay, so it looks like this test that I've put together predicts skill to some extent, but how does it measure up against other predictors? So I wanted to see, does it predict skill better than domain general cognition, particularly some of the arguments highlighted by meta-analysis by Voss et al. And I used the BNT, which you are probably all familiar with, to assess domain general cognition or cognitive ability. I also wanted to look at domain general spatial ability, given that the test kind of forces you to map things out over space. I used the mental rotations test for that. And I also wanted to compare performance on the OASSIS with a domain-specific knowledge test, or a declarative knowledge test. And just to sort of give you a brief idea of what these things are, the soccer knowledge question, there's a few more questions in this, but it's sort of this idea. We'll go to our expert here. In soccer, what part of the body is not allowed to touch the ball?
Me?
Oh yeah.
I can't really, it's gotta be hand.
Yeah, so it's
Arm.
head, arm, leg, chest.
Arm.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so it's basic questions about the game. I expected that OASSIS would discriminate more powerfully than sort of a basic declarative knowledge test, but we'll get into that in a second.
But that's false, right?
Yeah. So there's also the BNT. This is pretty tough to read, but you guys are familiar with that. I used 4 questions that Edward provided me that are just statistical in nature. I also used the mental rotations test, like I said, and if you haven't seen this before, it's these cool little arrangements of cubes, and then you get a target image, and you're given 4 response images, and you have to pick the 2 that are rotated versions of the target image, as opposed to the other 2, which are actually different configurations of cubes. All right, so participants completed the soccer knowledge questionnaire, the BNT and the MRT, and they had scores calculated for those. Those scores were entered as predictor variables into a multiple logistic regression analysis, and skill group membership, just being a member of the high skill group or the low skill group, was entered as a dichotomous predicted variable. All right, and the good stuff, I guess. The analysis revealed that OASSIS predicted skill group membership more than the BNT or the MRT. So, lo and behold, this test of anticipation in soccer tells you more about how good someone is at soccer than the BNT and the mental rotation test. It's what we'd expect, right? This was counter to what I expected. OASSIS was actually not a better predictor than the soccer knowledge questionnaire. The soccer knowledge questionnaire actually soaked up a lot of the variance that the OASSIS had previously soaked up. And I have some theories as to why that is, but that's certainly a point for discussion.
But what do you mean by how do you test that?
How to test what?
Which one is it better?
So I'm just comparing the beta values. The beta value, I think like what divided by the standard error is the standardized beta. So basically this number over this number is bigger than this number over this number.
Okay.
The soccer knowledge questionnaire basically had a larger effect of predicting. I didn't do a hierarchical logistic regression, if that's what you're asking. But that was one of the things we talked about at my defense. And then I also
you use a single predictor in the model, a separate model for both.
for these two.
For this one, yes.
Yeah. So this was one regression equation comparing domain general cognition.
No, when you compare the OASSIS with the SKQ.
Yeah, that was a separate.
Okay.
Yep, that was separate. Yep. And that's just because that's how I'd organized my hypotheses beforehand.
But if you put them both in, they are both predicted simultaneously? Or?
No. So they weren't. No. So the OASSIS was no longer predictive at a significant level when the SKQ was included. So I also include this relationship just because I think it's also a demonstration of convergent validity, that declarative knowledge is related to OASSIS performance. But so I'm going to speculate a little bit. I'm going to get back to that soccer knowledge questionnaire point because that's a thorn for sure. Skill effects on OASSIS performance demonstrate criterion validity. The relationship between OASSIS performance and anticipation on the option generation task demonstrates concurrent validity. And the relationship between OASSIS performance and option generation behavior demonstrates convergent validity. And then going into the last experiment, domain-specific perceptual cognitive skills were superior to domain general cognition for predicting skill. That's in line with a number of studies. And domain-specific knowledge was superior to OASSIS for predicting skill. Now, I had a couple of theories about why this happened. First of all, there was, I think, maybe a ceiling effect, because when you have that easy little questionnaire, the high skill level players are performing really well on that, like almost always getting 100%. So I think that we'd find that if I had more than 2 skill groups, so like a Division 1 players, say, Division 2 players, and then recreational level players, we might find that the OASSIS is better at discriminating among high skill groups, whereas the knowledge questionnaire is the best for weeding out the really low skill players. Now that's, an empirical question that needs some support still, but I speculate that that might be the case. So part of my future work, I think, are to answer these 2 questions. So when is OASSIS most effective? Like I was just saying, OASSIS testing among more than 2 or 3 skill groups, so that I can see when it discriminates better than the soccer knowledge questionnaire, if at all. And also, another thing I thought about is OASSIS different age groups. I tend to find that this doesn't work well for discriminating between low skill groups, because people tend to struggle quite a bit. And also, how can OASSIS be more effective? And for that question, I'm planning to do some item analysis throughout the test and reorganize the test to be adaptive in nature. Because I'm sure there are some items that are basically less discriminative than others. Okay, and then I just have my acknowledgements. So my committee was Dr. Ward, Dr. Coakley, and Dr. Miller. There were 2 grants that funded the research I presented here and other research. And I'll field some questions. Yeah?
So I wanted you to go back to your first, I guess, study 4, where you're looking at the OASSIS results comparing novice and experts.
Okay.
So
All right.
So, okay. There are 45 questions.
That's right.
And so let's see, so the experts were about 75% accurate. The novices were a little over 50% accurate.
Yeah.
And that's similar across, well,
So here the effect was a little bit diminished, but that's, the difference here, I don't have like the demographic information, but these 13 were a combination of players and actually coaches. So they were better. They were a better skill group, I think, in total than just this Division 1 team that I worked with.
So why do you define accuracy as what the person did?
Because that's what they're asked. They're asked to anticipate the player on screen. They're not asked to identify.
So in all the cases, were the majority of experts in agreement with that answer?
Right. So you're saying, like, were there items where maybe a lot of the experts all answered B when the correct answer was A?
I don't know. Well, I'm disputing.
We're correct. Right.
Correct.
Right.
The ground.
So I haven't looked into it at that level, but that's sort of one of the things I think is kind of the next step here, is looking at which items, because some items, right, there might be a better correct answer to have there than what is the actual outcome of that situation. But yeah, but I haven't really looked into that. I can't quite answer that question yet. But I see what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, because basically, changing the correct, what I call the correct answer for that trial, would increase the discriminability of the test potentially.
Right. Well, so I mean, this is exactly what like cultural consensus theory does. You don't necessarily know what the right answer is, but you can find the correct answer.
Yeah.
Basically by doing factor analysis.
Yeah. Right.
So you should see if, I mean, it might be that those 25% errors are just sprinkled throughout, or it might be sprinkled throughout a few individuals, or it might be some of the answers should be coded differently.
Yeah,
And knowing that could help improve the
increase the
validity.
power, yeah, sure. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, that's definitely something I'll look into.
What's the difference between experiment 4 and 5 or and 6?
So, experiment 4, players only did the online test in experiment 4, and experiment 5 basically replicates the skill effect online. But the reason that I did it anyway is because in experiment 5 I had access to players in person, and I was able to have them do the option generation task as well. So when I look at, actually that's not quite true. These folks did both in experiment 4. These folks I couldn't get to meet in person, so they only did the online. So when I look at these correlations, only a small portion of recreational level players participated in experiment 4. So I wanted to do experiment 5 to see if those relationships between the option generation test and the online anticipation test held among a high skill group, and they did. And also, not just the relationship between performance on option generation and OASSIS, but also the relationship between the number of options generated and performance on OASSIS. Does that make sense? Okay.
When you divide the group, high skill group and low skill group, that's based on their
That's based on their previous affiliation, yeah. So
affiliation.
yeah, so they play for a Division I. So the high skill group is Division I college soccer team, and the low skill group are Michigan Tech students who have played soccer before.
But they didn't have any other test or
So they haven't. There's an experience questionnaire also, so I could maybe weed the low skill group into maybe a couple groups if I wanted to. I haven't done it yet, but that option's open to me, yeah. So because like some of them I'm assuming will have played like high school varsity, where some of them just sort of played recreationally all throughout. But all of them are like recreational level players, sort of like at the moment. Maybe in the low skill group plays like on the team here. So yeah.
So how did you pick the items that were going to be included in the OASSIS? So I know your generation task, you have more than what's in the OASSIS, right?
No, I have less actually.
Okay.
So the option generation task is 24 trials that occlude, and all the information comes off the screen, and they have a response sheet that matches the occlusion image on the screen, and they draw their options out. That's basically just in line with what Paul and some colleagues have done in the past. What I wanted to do, basically when people respond on that image, you know, so you know, whatever, there's the gold box kind of. This is just in the guide about it. So when people respond, they go, okay, I think he's going to pass it into this space for this player to like run a get. I mean, that's just an example of what they might say. But the point is that they use arrows and things to indicate three things to me, really. And I felt that the three things they indicated to me were the action that's going to occur via the use of like a dotted line or a solid line, the direction that the action is going to occur in, and the targeted recipient in the events of passes. So when I decided what types of questions I wanted to do multiple choice on the OASSIS, I thought, well, why not have action? Sometimes they answer actions, sometimes they indicate directions, sometimes they indicate recipients. The difference with the OASSIS trials is that there's 45 of them, and each of those 45 have a pre, at, post contact. So that's another, it's just another avenue for me to pursue with item analysis to see where the discriminative clips kind of lie among those. But again, that's what I'm doing next.
So you didn't look at, because I know you had experts rate those original 24 as far as what the
so I didn't
anticipated versus what the best
so
option.
I had an expert, two experts, one of which was myself.
Right.
But it was done a priori. Basically say what, given this clip, what are the good things to generate, what are the bad things to generate, And that was the other thing that the experts had access to was they could watch the clip over and over, and they could watch what actually happened over and over, and they could really get a feel for what was going on. And so those a priori definitions were predictive of skill in the data we collected. So I suspect Paul would say the proof's in the pudding.
No, it's more of just to check Shane's point that
Okay.
Are you having any decisions that
Oh, right, that are like less
Right.
certain
Yep.
than others. Yeah. So yeah, there was very low disagreement between the experts on those option generation trials.
right?
Now again, those are different than the OASSIS trials.
Mhm.
So.
But I
to look
mean,
at-
as
yeah.
far as the anticipating what's going to happen versus what should happen.
Right, right. So I certainly could look into that, like I was mentioning. But I also I really was careful how I phrased the wording on OASSIS because I really wanted them to understand that I'm asking you what will happen next.
Yeah.
So if you see the guy running up and he's going to take a shot and you know that he can't hit that shot or that's the wrong decision, you still know that that's what he's going to do, that's still the correct answer. Now, it becomes clear that the person's going to do something. So like, you might think, well, maybe knowing what he should do inhibits my ability to predict what he actually does because I'm better than the player on the screen, or something to that extent. But that should also come out in the pre, at, and post contact of each clip.
Yeah.
Because basically, once it's post contact, you should
Yeah.
know what he's going to do. So if people are discriminating well at post contact, but then experts are starting to get the answer wrong as you go to pre contact, maybe that's indicative of a clip that the should have and the did have don't really align.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What level of play are the videos from?
So the level of, the videos are from MLS Academy teams. So those are, they're going to be I believe like U21. But those are all players that are basically battling for spots on the practice squads for MLS professional teams. So I'd probably rank them at about the same skill level as Division I college players because they're going to be a little bit younger, but also probably a little bit better for their age.
Okay.
But yeah, but that's another good question is, like if you had players that were, like if I gave this to MLS players, would they be hindered by the fact that they're, dealing with less skilled players? Certainly that's an issue. So I think the stimuli, you have to match the participants. But for the most part, I haven't been using this with MLS players. I've been using this for skill groups in college and below. Though I did some cool work with another company where we used pro level stuff. Yeah?
I have another question. I'm just curious. So when you compare the predictability of OASSIS with other tests, right?
Yeah.
So you included Berlin Numeracy Test.
Yeah.
So what's the rationale for inclusion of that? Because that's a numeracy test, so that's related to
So that's a good question. It was Edward's recommendation that I include this test, but also there's an argument made by Voss et al. In 2010. It's a meta-analysis that talks about the types of domain general cognition that over the course of many studies actually show skill effects with athletes. So it's not just soccer, but across a lot of sport studies. And some of the things they highlighted are some of the things that the BNT correlates with. And then the reason to go over to the BNT is because it's sort of quick and easy and online. In particular, I think one was like attentional paradigms, and then the BNT also was related to, I think like it was working memory span. I don't remember quite off the top of my head, but basically the test that, the types of cognition that were cited were related, were related to the BNT in this publication, where they show all the things that the BNT are sort of converge with.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. So the BNT actually hit on two measures of cognition I was interested in, based on those relationships that Copley pointed out. Plus it was something that I had access to that was I could put online because once you're doing all these and the OASSIS and the option generation task, it's really turning into a battery of stuff. So I was trying to keep things brief also.
What model you use to predict group membership?
That was a multiple logistic regression. So basically, I just entered in these scores for these tests and their score for OASSIS, and I entered in what skill group they belong to, just 0 and 1 was the predicted variable, and then I compared the betas of those variables to see which one explained the most variance.
Say it again. The model you use.
A multiple logistic regression. Any other questions? Yeah.
So what are you going to do with OASSIS?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I guess what's it used
Right.
for? What's
I
the
mean,
purpose?
right. So the purpose, I think, was just as part of the U.S. soccer grant that I was operating under, was to develop sort of a quick, easy diagnostic test, and that's what this is basically. A quick and dirty. You send a link out to your players. The data is straightforward. Now, you know, like I've entertained the thought of like.
How long does it take to complete OASSIS?
So it's 45 trials. Each one is, 5 to 10 seconds.
Right.
So it takes under an hour just to do the OASSIS. For everyone that signs on for my research and does all of this stuff, it's something closer to 2 hours.
Okay.
But yeah, just the OASSIS alone is much shorter. Right. So like if I hadn't done that internship I did last semester, I'd say that the OASSIS is really the cream of the crop. There's nothing higher fidelity out there, but it looks like there might be a little bit there to some extent. So I don't know. I spent time in my internship like building up the thing that's better than the thing that I just made. So I don't know how smart that is. But.
Right, well, I mean, so are you going to use this in future research?
Yeah,
or
yeah.
is it for, like,
Yeah.
saying, hey, are you eligible to be on my team?
Well, both.
You know,
I think
'cause you're
both
not-
is the answer, and
right,
that's why this is
exactly.
so. That's why this is.
So
Yeah,
do
it's
they
been- it's
have
been
to
so
go
effective.
through, like, IQ tests to be on a national sports team?
No. So, I mean, there's a long way to go before a test like this is probably implemented for the purpose of like cutting players, or like, but it certainly could. I think you could make a case that this is a part of a comprehensive assessment for that purpose. So, like, I like to think of the example of the Philadelphia Union, which is an MLS team, and they have a training academy where kids come in when they're 5 years old, and they start training to, one day I'm going to grow up and play for the Union, and then they make cuts at age 9, and they make cuts at age 12, and 15, and 18, and you're left with the practice squad for this team. And I tend to think that maybe particularly at the low ages, where the main factor that's probably contributing to their success is their physical growth.
Right.
Maybe having a measure of their cognitive ability is more predictive of who's going to be good when you're 9 or 12 or 15 than just who's big and strong and fast right now. That's a longitudinal study that's waiting to be done,
Right.
but I have an idea that could be the case. So maybe you use this as part of a battery of assessments when you cut players, instead of just like the who looks good coaching kind of.
Have a more objective.
Yeah. And there's also, I guess, like, I like to think that there's like a positive ethical impact there too, because you're not discriminating against kids that are, smaller necessarily at the time, or less developed, maybe I should say. Cool. All right then. That's it.
Does anyone know who signed up next week?
It was supposed to be me, maybe, and then I switched.
Oh.
Maybe.
Next week might be open.
Announcement, t-shirt, we got the t-shirt.
Oh, yeah.
And anyone has ordered the t-shirt, feel free to stop by 201 and pay your money. And we have like 5 extra t-shirts, so feel free to order more if you need. We are family. Is it really good?
Yep, so if you order one of those, just bring $10 to 201 and we'll swap you.
We'll take your money.
We don't accept IOUs.